D.Daly here with you. I am the principal double bass of the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, and over many years working with the orchestra I have played lots of recordings, and I was really delighted to see in last April's BBC Music Magazine review of CDs that the BSO recording of Benjamin Britten's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra was one of the very top recommendations, even beating Benjamin Britten's own recording of the work. I was especially pleased when the reviewer mentioned loving the balletic double bass variation. Now that's not a description we often get in the double bass world. So today I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about how to approach this variation. This variation is only just over 1 minute long, and so I thought it would be really interesting to widen discussion while we're learning this variation to the general approach to learning orchestral excerpts, or if you have a recital, for a recital. One thing I've seen, I've listened to many auditions over the years of various instruments in the orchestra, and you will sometimes get players that come along and play the excerpt very well, but yet there's something missing, and it can cause unease in an audition panel. And what is that thing that's missing? It's something to do with the player giving a sense that they don't really know the music. They've learned how to play the notes, but you don't get the idea that they understand what this music is in the wider context. And that can give a sense of unease if you're considering a person to join your orchestra. You're thinking, will this person actually know how to play as part of the orchestra, how to join in musically with all the other musicians around? So I want to discuss that as well, the wider thing and also Benjamin Britten's variation. Now, if you don't know Benjamin Britten's Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, you've got to know it. It is one of the most fantastic pieces in music out there. Britten was an incredibly original composer, and in this piece, I think it's one of his very best pieces. All of that originality really comes together in so many ways. It's a variation, it's a set of variations on a theme by Purcell, very old English composer. Britten takes the theme and then he does many variations for different instruments and different sections in the orchestra. Originally, the piece would have been performed with a narrator explaining. I mean, you can see in the title it says to young people, so it would have been explaining to a young person's level what was going on. Very quickly it was realised the piece was such a fantastic piece of music, it just stood on its own. You didn't need a narrator, and it's quite obvious what's going on. So, let me just take a minute to play this variation to you. It takes just over a minute, and if you're unfamiliar with it, you'll see what I will be talking about. If you're familiar with it, well, it needs no introduction. That's it. And that, interestingly, is how Britten wanted to convey the character of the double bass. Well, Saint-Saëns wanted to do that. If you know Saint-Saëns' variations in Carnival of the Animals, he used an elephant. And very often the double bass does get tarred with an elephant-like reference. So I think it's fantastic that Britten didn't go there, but did this really quirky approach to the variation. So there's an excerpt. You have to learn it for an audition. You can learn that excerpt, and then are you ready for the audition? I would say not. First of all, do you know the piece? When you get up to play this excerpt, is it going to sound like you just learned the notes, or are you going to convey that you know how quirky and how wonderful this is and how it sort of fits into the wider piece of music? And that's the clue as to how to get this sort of holistic approach to your playing. No. So, get to know the piece of music. See if you like it. If you don't like it, maybe you won't. Couldn't understand that though, because I think it's fantastic. When it comes to this moment, just think, well, what comes before? We're actually after the violin, the viola, and the cello variation. And true to form, the violin variation has been very virtuosic and triumphant. Then we have a viola variation, which is very dreamy. Then we have a cello variation, which is indulgent and languorous. So you see, he's sort of picking up on characteristics of instruments, and then we come to the double bass variation. So that sort of sets a bit of a context to the actual piece. Right, so let's go to the piece and have a close look at it. Now, when you're learning an excerpt, it's very easy just to go straight into learning notes. For instance, that section, it's an awkward section, you can play it 100 times. I would suggest, let's have a look musically what is happening in the whole thing before you even start studying the technique of it. So that's what we're going to do here. So when we look at this little variation, it's sort of an ABA form, isn't it? It opens up with these sort of arpeggio passages. Then that gets faster and builds up. Then you have a middle section. Nice melody. And then it goes back to a similar, although inverted, arpeggio. I would say the main characteristic musically of this whole thing is how Britten creates this sort of complete insecurity regarding rhythm. The whole thing is completely syncopated. It's when I start to play, we never play on the first beat. It's 1, 2, 1, and 2, 1. So, to a listener listening, it can quite easily sound, well, you will have the flutes playing on the first beat. But for the player playing in audition, you're going to have this sort of first beat missing, which is important to sort of hear that in your head. The other thing that Britten does, which is quite brilliant and very quirky, is this melody. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It sounds as though it's in 3. And even with the chirping wind accompaniment that goes with this passage, it still sounds in 3. Of course it's not. It's in 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I think when you're preparing this, all this sort of rhythmic insecurity that is built into the piece, you need to be aware of it. So, in a sense, the player, doesn't trip up on it. The other quirky thing, I keep using that word, it's a good word for this piece. The other quirky thing for this is the phrasing. I mean, typically, if we just saw this music and we were going to phrase it, we would tend to phrase away from the first, wouldn't we? It's not like that. You'll see in the part, each little bar has a hairpin. again, goes against the instinct, probably quirky. And then in the nice melody, you would tend, without phrase markings, you would tend to want to play sort of as though we were going to the one, if it was in 3 rhythm, the one of each 3. But it's not. The phrasing is very quirky. It feels very counterintuitive. So you've got to find a way of doing that. And finally, what on earth is he doing harmonically in this piece? And I think that is something that can easily tend to sort of make this piece a little bit hard to learn, because particularly you start, there's no real harmonic center. The melody, the melody that the whole piece is based on, starts in a D major arpeggio. And Britten takes that element to start the variation. All rising arpeggios. But harmonically, where are we going? And I think that's the main tension for the listener in this piece. It's sort of unclear as to where we are going. We're going rising somewhere, and it starts with it's a B major sort of harmony. Then we go to, it's like a G minor, G sharp minor. Like an A. Like a B flat major. Like a C major. Then we have like a D major. And then he goes through the series of notes until we get to the repeated Gs. And you think, yes, we're in G. And indeed we have the scale. So we sort of establish a G major, the piece is in G major, and we've established that G major tonal center. And then we have the melody, which starts off in G. All going well here. Harmonically, we're still very comfortable in our G major. D sharp. Why are we on a D sharp? That doesn't form part of G major. This D sharp is becoming a new tonal center. So all of a sudden we've lost our G major and we've got this D sharp hanging. What happens now? Again. We move through various sort of suggestions of keys until we get to this then. And we hit that G again with the scales. So you see we have this sort of tension in the keys, and that's really what this movement is about. He's put a sort of disruptive harmonic movement, disruptive phrasing, disruptive rhythm, and I mean that's the genius of the piece.